So this lecture concerns the overview of experimental studies. So before we start talking about experimentation, we would like to make sure that we have a clear understanding on the difference between experimental and non-experimental studies. And in particular here, we are going to contrast correlational study and experimental method. Correlational studies with two or more quantitative variables, such as interval, are indicated by interval or ratio scale, is capable of providing or describing the relations between two variables. So, for example, the first one is the example of positive linear relation, the second one being negative linear relations. Those two cases can be contrasted with when there is no relations, which is the bottom case. So as you can see, positive relations means, correlation means, basically when A increases, B increases in a systematic way. So recap on correlation versus causation. So the goal of experimental studies is identifying causal relations of how variable A and B are causally related. This requires, in order to identify causal relations, in turn requires three different kinds of criteria that's actually listed here. Covariation, which is captured by correlation. Temporal precedence, that in order for one to say one is cause, the other one is an effect, cause needs to happen before the effect. So in terms of time, the cause needs to happen earlier than the effect, which refers to temporal precedence. And then finally, identifying a causal relations, that means a particular variable is causing the changes in the other variable, requires that no other potential variables are bringing about that effect. For example, weight and reading ability is positively related, and larger the weight, higher the reading ability. But this is due to development. Adults are definitely heavier and they read better. So that's the third variable, and this needs to be actually eliminated in order to identify cause and effect. So all the non-experimental studies, including survey, observation, whose data can be analyzed using correlation analysis, has limitation. These two limitations are direction of causality cannot be controlled, which means lack of temporal precedence. Number two, possible third variable or maybe fourth or fifth variable affecting the outcome cannot be ruled out. Okay, therefore, that's why we need to conduct experimentation. And so in that sense, experimentation has needs to be clearly differentiated from any other kinds of study, because only true experiment is capable of identifying cause and effect. So we are going to talk about the limitation of correlational analysis in contrast to experimentation, to talk about importance of experimentation in identifying causality using an example. So this example is provided in the Stanovich Think Straight in Psychology, and this is based on the actual observation that's described in the Stanovich book. So Goldberger, who's a researcher, saw a problem. The problem that they observed is there is a disease called pellagra, which tend to involve fatigue, diarrhea, and some other physical symptoms. And what they also observed is occurrence of pellagra is more prevalent in the neighborhood with the poor sewage. So there isn't a correlation between these two things. Okay, So based on that, many people infer the causal relations. That's actually inferior sewage is causing pellagra. So the reasoning is inferior sewage causing the pellagra disease, which is based on the microorganisms to spread through poor sewage. So that's a contagious disease. That's how they understood. However, Goldberger actually suspected there is a third variable, which is actually the poor sewage happens in the poor neighborhood. And the people living in a poor neighborhood has a particular kinds of diet patterns, namely high carbohydrate with a lack of protein in diet. Therefore, there is a completely different kinds of causal, so namely the third variable problem that's identified here. So as described in the previous the slide, uh, the prevalent view is actually pellagra is caused by microorganisms through contagion. Uh, on the other hand, Goldberger has a different hypothesis. That's actually it's a pellagra as a problem due to diet, poor low protein diet. So in order to actually demonstrate that pellagra is only caused by uh, poor diet, namely with a low protein diet, he followed two steps. The step one is to falsify the original hypothesis, which is occurrence of pellagra as transmission of infectious disease through poor sewage. So in order to falsify that, he conducted another kind of disgusting experiment. So he basically collected the residual sample, like fecal matters, scraped skins, and all these different things that's collected from pellagra patient. And then he made a sort of dough, and without cooking it, to keep the potential virus or microorganisms alive in the dough, he and his research assistant and his wife actually swallowed it. So the hypothesis is if pellagra is mediated and caused by microorganisms, eating the residual matter that's produced or residual matter containing these microorganisms that's collected from the patient should cause pellagra. But it didn't happen. So he was correct. So that's the step one. He falsified the original hypothesis. But falsifying original hypothesis doesn't automatically lead to the support of his alternative hypothesis that pellagra is caused by poor diet. Therefore, he conducted the second experiment. In the second experiment, he basically recruited prisoner, which is actually unethical, but at that time it was okay. And then so these are healthy prisoners, and these healthy prisoners who's not showing pellagra symptom randomly into two different conditions. So one group of people continue to have the same diet, prison diet. The other group of people are assigned to limited protein diet, low protein diet, high carbohydrate dieting. And then what they found is only those assigned to experimental group with low protein diet started showing the pellagra symptom. So therefore, that support that pellagra is caused by low protein diet and only by low protein diet, because he already falsified that in the experiment one, pellagra is not caused by transmission of contagion through microorganisms. So the key idea or gist of experimentation is to isolate and control only one variable at a time, and to observe the effect of the variable that you might isolate it and manipulate it. So this in effect control the temporal precedence, because the reason is you're first manipulating the variable, which is designated as an independent variable, which we are going to talk about, and then you're going to observe its effect through dependent variable. That ensures temporal precedence. And then it also controls for third variable program. The reason why is you are isolating only one variable and manipulating only that variable. As in the case of Goldberg's study, second study, what he actually did is prisoners who are healthy, and then randomly assign them into two dieting conditions. Therefore, only thing that's different was the nature of the food that they consumed on the daily basis. So that's the gist of experimental control. So the key procedure in designing experimentation, you need to be aware of the distinction and identity of three different kinds of variables. Independent variable is the variable that you isolate and manipulate. Dependent variable is the variable that you hypothesize, you believe to be affected by the manipulation of independent variables. And that's what you're actually testing. It's no guarantee that it's affected, but you're hypothesizing it would be affected. Okay. Then in addition to that, you need to be always aware of extraneous variables. And what are the extraneous variables? Extraneous variables are the variables that assumes to affect or suspected to affect the dependent variables in the real world. Let's say that you are interested in parenting style on self-esteem, and parenting style is an independent variable and the dependent variable is a self-esteem. These self-esteems in the real world are affected by socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity, and all these other different kinds of variables. Those are extraneous variables. So the purpose of experiment is to remove these extraneous variables or to control it so that its effect can be ruled out as the potential cause of the change in dependent variable in an experiment. So as we talked about in the previous slide, the third variable is an extraneous variable. And then your skill of creating a great experiment is your attention and ability and patience to control all the possible extraneous variable to minimize its effect. So this is actually talked about in relation to the concept called the internal validity. So the larger the suspected effect of extraneous variables, poorer the internal validity. Because the internal validity is the extent to which you believe that the results of your experiment is caused only by the manipulation of the independent variable, which is your hypothesized cause. One of the most specific and most essential technique to minimize the effect of extraneous variable is called random assignment. Random assignment is the technique that increases the likelihood two or more groups of the conditions are filled with similar kind of people, given that your sample size is large enough. So let's say that you have many different kinds of participants. If you randomly assign these people into condition A and condition B, because it's random, the likelihood is condition A and B are filled with similar kinds of people. That achieve the minimization of the effect of extraneous variables. In sum, essence of experiment is experimental control. Okay, so you need to be obsessed with the control. So how is it accomplished? You're going to isolate and manipulate only one variable at a time. This means having an experimental and appropriate control condition. the difference between the two conditions is your manipulation. Okay, and the difficult part is what is good control condition is one of the most challenging question in experimental psychology. And then in order to ensure the control, you also apply random assignment to fill the same kind of people into two different kinds of conditions. So having good control condition is not sufficient. It needs to be filled with the same kind of people as experimental condition to minimize extraneous variable. If you are successful in controlling extraneous variables, you have a high confidence that any effect that you observed through dependent variable is caused only by your manipulation of independent variable. When that happens, it's said that you can have a high internal validity, which means that you have a high confidence that your result was observed through dependent variable is caused only by the manipulation of your independent variable.